Hey everyone, it's Lisa Sweeney here from Business and Heels, and I'm doing a deep dive into the Gender Equity Awards at the moment, and I've been so lucky to be joined today by Tenille Saffin. So welcome, Tenille.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm delighted to be here.
So Tenille is actually the General Manager of People and Capability for Sladen Legal, and she won the Senior Manager category for the Gender Equity Awards last year. So we're absolutely thrilled to have you with us and very excited to do a little bit of a deep dive into, why you were a winner and some of the work that you've done. So I was wondering if you could take a minute just to share with us maybe some specific examples of the positive impact your work has had on gender equity within the organisation, which I think was FB Rice at the time when you were nominated,
Yes.
and what things have happened for the broader community as a result of that.
I think it's quite intangible at certain stages within that journey. So, it's almost like you can't put your finger on it as it's unfolding. But I think leaving FBIS, which was almost like a divorce grieving process, but I've moved on and I'm enjoying my new role. But I did reflect on, what are the changes that were implemented through our work in inclusion and diversity, and particularly in gender equality. And I think really it was about opening up. I feel like people were more open to the conversation, to having those, difficult conversations. And I think that's the key. If you feel like you're empowered to talk about it, then we're going to have progress. It felt a little bit taboo. And I think in, other organisations I've worked with is that it feels a little bit taboo about talking about gender equality and will I offend men or women, or, it's very charged. So I think that the main change I noticed was at the end of that 4 or 5 year journey with FB Rice and this amazing process we went through with WGEA, through the Employer of Choice for Gender Equality citation process. We empowered people and we actively engaged in that conversation. And that flowed on to, really marked changes with progression discussions, remuneration discussions even. So women were talking about REM, what they're going to be paid. And I think I have a general reluctance to speak about REM sometimes, and that can be the case with women very generally. So I think that we used to send out an email in March saying, we encourage you, it's voluntary, but please do speak with your manager about REM. So, those kind of things I think are quite small but significant. So I was really pleased to see that. Yeah.
I think hugely significant. So I think 70% of women, so there are some stats around it, won't ask for a pay rise.
Yes, that's right.
So,
yeah, I think
wow.
there's quite a bit of research around it, isn't there? And I think anecdotally, I'd picked that up in my role as an HR person across the years, even in recruitment discussions and, contract signing. Women were more reluctant to really get in there and say, look, I'm on this and I want to jump even. Often women would say, I'll come across at the same REM, and they're missing out on those incremental jumps in REM when they change roles. So I've, had to work on that myself in my own negotiations regarding REM, and I've been really pleased to see that my REM has increased because of it. So it's quite practical. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and look, and something I love the fact that you honed in on the difficult conversations, and as a result, FB Rice is actually also a finalist in the awards as well. So clearly, you've done something very well.
And I think that's the difficulty when you win an award. I mean, I won an award on an individual level, but I mean, I think we all know that it's part of a bigger discussion. We had co-chairs of the Inclusion and Diversity Committee, so a male and a female. They were instrumental in all of this work. And our committee was, and, our managing partner. So I think, I have to kind of make sure that I, am recognising that it's about me, but it's also about that bigger picture of it's a community that affected that change during those years. And people who are really, candid and committed to moving it forward. It came from a great base, so we weren't struggling, but we just wanted more and we wanted to be leaders in that space. So, yeah.
I think sometimes what we see is the person that is the winner is a little bit of like the firecracker within the organisation. They're the catalyst that often inspires the other people and all those around them to kick off and holds them accountable. So, of course it takes a team to make massive change. So maybe you might like to share with you, because as you said, you weren't struggling, and there's lots of things you wanted to be, the best. What
Yes.
advice would you give to others who are passionate about advancing gender equity and don't know where to start?
Yeah, and I think because I've been reflecting in advance of our conversation today, and it's kind of, well, where did we start? And I think it was a mixture of understanding the organisation and doing a lot of listening about the history, why these decisions have been made. So having that respect of of the organisation's history, but also really having lots of very general conversations with lots and lots of people in the organisation, so that I'm not bringing my own filter on the next steps. I think I'm obviously very passionate about it, but I need to actually respond to the organisation and what their appetite is, and respect the culture of our organisation. So I think I spent a lot of time with our IDC, Inclusion and Diversity Committee, talking and listening and understanding. And that committee was so key, and they were so candid. It was during COVID too, so at home, a bit isolated. So we had some really fantastic discussions, and I think it was representative of different genders, gender diversity, but also different cultural backgrounds, different roles and things like that. So we made sure it was obviously a diverse IDC. But yeah, I think that was a really key first step. And I think that engaging with WGEA was one of the key moments where I think it all started to come together. So WGEA has the Employer of Choice for Gender Equality citation process. So, looking at that and being confident that that was based on very extensive research and international research as well. So engaging with scientists, engineers, lawyers, you need to have that kind of backing of, look, this is how it's okay, this is the research. And that seemed to really help when I referred to initiatives and concepts. Like we were talking about before with our REM discussion, we backed it up with research, and that was very powerful. So yeah, I think establishing that IDC was really key, and listening. And then I think what we did is we actually discussed within our own group our unconscious bias. So how will that impact how we roll out our initiatives across the firm? And we actually participated in unconscious bias training as a committee. So we were very aware that we're bringing our own filter. We need to be consulting and representing our firm. And we used the Harvard Implicit Association test. I'm not sure have you come across that, Lisa? Yeah. I'm not an expert in it, so it was probably worth Googling it and having a look at it yourself. But essentially what it does is, in particular areas, it'll actually kind of test your reaction times using, online tools to uncover a bias. And basically in a particular area. So I chose science because I'm a science graduate. I did, I went to an all-girls school, did science, and, basically wasn't even really aware of this whole gender inequality concept when I left school. So I actually chose science. Do I have a bias that males are more predisposed to scientific careers? And I thought, goodness me, no way would I have that bias. But the implicit association test brought it up. So yes, I do. And, it's something that I've really had to reflect on. Where does that come from, and what's that about? So we use that to actually understand as a group that we're bringing our own biases to this process. So we need to be careful when we're discussing that. We will consult, talk to as many people as we can, and design initiatives that are good for the firm, not just good for our own, individual biases. So that, those kind of pieces came together really beautifully in the meantime where I was consulting with WGEA. Had a fantastic representative there that I just, can't thank enough, Anna. We worked closely together, but essentially we submitted our first citation application and failed. We knew we were going to fail, but we saw it as, well, that'll inform our plans. So what's the feedback? And we went through a very comprehensive meeting of, well, these are the areas that you're falling down on. And essentially what it was, it was really powerful. And that formed our gender equity plan, and that formed our discussions for the following 18 months. So that was valuable, that feedback, and based on research. So I was, we were very confident as a committee, yes, let's go with this, and this is what we need to be doing. Yeah. Sorry.
I love the comments that you made around too about unconscious bias, and the fact that you then started testing it. One of the things we're about to roll out is an unconscious bias test every week. So it's just a little thing so people can stay ahead of it, because I think unless you practice it, you know, everybody keeps, and it's part of being successful too, is to be able to make connections, you know, unconsciously. But yes, trying to stay ahead of your own unconscious biases, it's a challenge.
It is, I think. And I mean, it's that, you know, below the iceberg, tip of the iceberg, values-based stuff that, you know, you're conditioned that way, and it's, you know, it's something that you just need to be aware of. And I think that reflective piece is important when you're engaging with a firm, because, you know, you've got your own lived experience, so you can share that, as I am today. You know, this is what I experienced myself. That was a real surprise. So, you know, when we're designing or speaking at a board level, you know, what's coming into these decisions, what history, what values, and unconscious bias. So yeah, that was very powerful. So we rolled those sessions out after we'd had our time as a committee. I think we ended up running 9 sessions across the firm over 6 months. We had a really high participation rate. So I think that was a sign that there was an appetite for this space in the firm. So we had some really great discussions, and then I think just really, you know, rolling out the initiatives across about a year to 18 months. And I think that was probably one of the points that I'm reflecting on, is that, yeah, you can't rush this, as you probably know. Like, you need to kind of do that change process and bring people along and give them time to process their, you know, Harvard Implicit Association scores and what that means for them. So yeah, so I think, you know, 18 months for us was a really lovely time. And in parallel to that, we actually launched a culture survey through Human Synergistics. And that had, so it's been around for 40 years. It's a very old survey, but it's very long. Everyone complains, but it gives you invaluable data. They all, and the overthinkers hate it. But basically, it's an online survey. It is anonymous, and you can convince people that it's anonymous. It takes a while, but you can convince them. And basically, in that, there's data in there that talks about, you know, these concepts that, you know, we're interested in terms of female progression, leadership, all of that kind of thing. So we use that data as well for our business case for change in parallel. Yeah, so in the application citation document, we cited a figure which was quite concerning at the time, was that our fairness of appraisal score was quite low. And so we did a bit of a dive into the questions, and it came out that we were using too many subjective factors and not enough objective. So we spent a lot of time at the board level, leadership level, understanding what is our process, how do we assess progression, you know, in professional services, in a professional services firm. And it did come across that years of service was coming into it. It's quite a traditional measure of post-qualification experience. So we actually we talked about, well, what actually is progression? Well, it's about merit-based progression. And that informed our work on changing how we have those conversations around progression and appraisal. Yeah, so I feel like I'm talking about it for hours, but yeah.
Well, and you've got to remember, of course, with FB Rice, a lot of people there, like yourself, had a scientific background. And so, you know, there would be a leaning to facts and figures and, you know, absolutes, wouldn't there? And so that would be much more important than, say, in a marketing company, for example, where it's a lot more about creativity and things. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And I think that intertwining as much data in that setting was really important. And I think that also, you know, reduces the risk of unconscious bias, because you're using, you know, as much data as you can. So, yeah, I found that quite a powerful tool. So, yeah, I think basically we ended up with this amazing gender equality plan based on the culture survey data, based on conversations, and we chipped away at it. And we used these fantastic volunteers across the firm. So, you know, we had a project on parental leave. What do women need when they get back from parental leave in particular, and what do men need, and how do we ensure that we're supporting people in that really difficult period of their career, so women can continue that progression up to the senior ranks, because often we lose people in that middle section of their career when they're under the pump with kids and just struggling. I mean, I had kids at childcare that were sick every second week.
It seems to be the case, doesn't it? Sort of like
Yes.
inoculation process. They hit daycare and then they actually pick up everything, and then
Yeah.
you get it as well. So it's
Yeah, that's right. And it's like this constant.
exactly.
So, I mean, a practical initiative we implemented after that was that first full month back. We would, reduce working hours and, same pay, but just to really support and to send that message that, just get through that first month and whatever you kind of need. And not many people really change their working patterns, but I think it just really released them from that anxiety of, I've got this pressure, the cooker situation.
Yeah, it's the big unknown, isn't it? You just don't know how everyone's going to react to the new situation. Yeah,
Yes,
fantastic. I really like your point too of taking that check of the culture and the history and really trying to understand what the baseline is and where you're coming from. I think a lot of people look at great organisations and want to be there tomorrow, but understanding where you're at, because you've got to take people along for the ride. I think that's very smart.
Yeah, and I mentioned I've changed roles, so I'm in that learning phase at the moment, and I have a predisposition to action. I just, want to get stuff done, like you're saying. So I've had moments in the last 6 months where I've kind of thought, oh, I'm moving too fast. I need to pull it back a bit. So fortunately, they're lovely people at Sladen, so they're very patient with me. But I think what I find in all the organisations I've been working with is that there's never people who push back against gender equality. They never say, oh, it's not important or, not something that we should focus on. So I think it's this kind of how do we move good intention to actual pragmatic initiatives like the one I referenced before about REM discussions and even the return to work from parental leave. Yeah. And that's tailored to the organisation and the role, as you mentioned, with marketing and, different organisations need different things. So I think you're just not rushing it and really making sure that it's impactful. And I think, in these senior roles too, you can kind of lose people pretty easily, really. So if you kind of, come across as a bit gung-ho and not prepared. So I think that's something I've learned the hard way too, is that you need to really give it careful consideration and put together a business case and try and, speak to as many people so you can answer the questions that are raised.
Yeah. Corral your supporters before you go too far.
Yeah. And it's not a hard thing to do because everyone is on the same page. So I think it's an interesting dynamic, really.
So tell us a little bit, Tenille, about your plans for the future in terms of your gender equity work.
I think from my perspective, I think sharing the pragmatic examples is really important because when I was working in this space, and I think we were chatting at the award ceremony, is that everyone kind of wants to know what everyone else is doing. So what are you doing in this space? So I think if I can share my practical solutions to moving that great intent to HR initiatives, really happy to do that in as many forums as I can. So I'm speaking on a panel with Ari in, I think, Geelong on the 20th of February. So really just trying to share the story as much as I can. But I think with this firm that I'm in is really starting from scratch again. So, the baseline's there. So how do I build on that baseline? Who do I need to be speaking with and just listening at the moment? I think the employer of choice for gender equality citation is so key in this piece. So, that'll be the next practical step I'll take is to engage with WGEA and, look at the citation document and trying to compare where we need to. It's really sometimes about documentation, like what documentation do we have for all the great work that's already occurring? Because that's kind of where we failed at FB Rice. We were doing the great work, but, we didn't have that kind of, it's not on paper. So, yeah.
Interesting. And I have to ask, so you pulled together this amazing committee to work on it. And you mentioned that, you brought in diverse cultures and diverse genders and things. Did that then halo to all the other, the intersectional problems that we're seeing across workplaces? Is that how, you fix gender equity and a whole lot of stuff around racism and the LGBTQIA plus community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really key question, isn't it, Lisa? Because it's kind of, how do you can't really slice up equity or equality. So we were doing significant work as a committee on the RAP process. And we were talking about basically just inclusive working environments for all people. So signalling that we're inclusive. And so that was where we were starting to talk about that intersectionality. And, it even came up with the International Women's Day discussions. So we held a small table discussions with the whole firm on International Women's Day, the cue cards on each table. And it came up in terms of gender diverse employees and the male and female. So we had a really great discussion about, well, is International Women's Day, still relevant because we've got that spectrum of genders now. So I felt like we were in the infancy in that conversation, but the committee was, really active in all areas of diversity. And we did talk a lot about that crossover and different groups in our organisation. So it did kind of keep expanding out. And that can be a difficult thing because it's like, it can get a bit overwhelming, but how do we get traction? What are we going to actually do? And that's where I think the employer of choice citation, it kind of focuses you. And we also did the Diversity Council of Australia Inclusive Employer Index survey with the staff. So that gave us a lot of other, data that we could rely on as well. And we were added to that list, which we were just delighted with. But, that actually also enabled us to focus. There were some areas for development in there that we were using as an IDC for our conversation. So we kind of love that data-driven approach, as you mentioned before. Bunch of scientists and engineers.
Yeah. I think it's wonderful that gender equality, it's 50% of the population. So it's it's an important issue for workplaces. But, what we've seen is that employers that get it and start setting up really inclusive behaviours and practices are just fixing it for everybody, whether it's about disability or race or about gender, whatever. It's just creating a whole lot more touch points for inclusivity and means for all the employees to benefit. So I just think, if it's a wonderful thing that at the end of it, we're all ending up with a better place to work.
Yes, that's very true, isn't it? And I think that signalling piece is so important. I think years ago we used to have the lanyards with the rainbow flag, and that just, that kind of opens up that conversation or creates a safe space. So, I think that's a really key point, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much, Tenille, for joining with me and sharing some of that stuff. So, for any of you who are looking to improve gender equity in your workplaces, Tenille's shared with you a wonderful roadmap and given you some very specific examples. You will be able to hear more from Tenille at our Gender Equity Winners Breakfast that we're going to have on the 20th of March. So if any of you are based in Melbourne and want to come along for a really lovely breakfast and to hear firsthand what some of these amazing individuals and companies are doing, you can. So feel free to join us there. And thank you so much again for sharing with us a little bit of your journey.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa. It was such a lovely opportunity.